Hi everyone, I'm Christine. Welcome back to Cabin Creek Homestead. Today we're getting close to April 19th, which is a big day here in North Carolina because in the Piedmont that is our average last frost date. So since we're quickly approaching and I know that I can't wait to get my hands in the dirt and start planting, we're prepping this field. Interestingly enough, we're prepping this field doing two things that I really don't like, but I have to do them anyway. Let's talk about tilling and using landscape fabric. Weeks ago, our neighbor came down and tilled up this whole area with his big, beautiful tractor. Eventually, though, I want to be able to not till this area. Tilling up an area repeatedly leads to the erosion of your topsoil. Topsoil is super important. What's happening there on a molecular level is just so important for a healthy ecosystem. And if we continuously till it, then what's happening is you are losing the structure you're losing your structural integrity of the whole little ecosystem that's underneath the soil, but you're also causing a massive amount of erosion. And if you're dealing with erosion, then water is actually flushing away a ton of the nutrients that naturally would be there. The regenerative farming movement is upon us, and I love it because instead of relying on chemical or unnatural fertilizers, we are growing our own fertilizers. Last year, we began to do this in this area by planting wheat. So we planted wheat and buckwheat and we let it grow up to a certain height, and then we tilled it back into the soil. Tilling it back up into the soil helps it to break down, decompose, and it's basically like we're growing our own fertilizer. We grew pumpkins here last year and they are just huge nitrogen eaters. A bunch of our plants just eat a ton of nitrogen. So our goal in this area is to restore nitrogen to the area based on whatever we plant instead of relying on chemical fertilizer. As much as I love regenerative farming and the no-till method, I think it's a very privileged way to start a garden. We have not been able to start that way because if we were going to do the no-till method, we would have to truck in tons and tons of compost into this area and put it on top of our natural red clay soil. That is so incredibly expensive. And so to expect everybody to start off this way in the no-till method, I think it's a little bit unreasonable. So what we've done is we have slowly begun to get ourselves to the place where next year we should not have to till anymore. And we've done that simply by tilling up the current area, adding tons of compost. Our animals supply us with a ton of manure. We have rabbits, chickens, donkeys, horses, pigs, goats. Chickens are the real VIP. Their manure is just chef's kiss. It sounds so gross. But we also compost all of our kitchen scraps. We compost leaves. We inoculated our compost pile with leaves from the forest last year, and it was just amazing how quickly our compost broke down into black gold after inoculating it with stuff from our local forest. And so what we've done is we've continuously brought up that compost into here and added that nutrients into this native red clay. And it's done two things. One, it's restored a lot of nutrients to this area that the pumpkins ate up last year, but it's also changed the composition of the red clay. Let's talk about the composition of red clay and how you can change it a little bit to work better for you. Gardening in red clay can be really tricky simply because of how compact it can get. Over time, the soil settles, and you even notice if you've gone through a dry spell that it starts to crack because it's so incredibly hard. But there's a couple of things that you can do to change your red clay in order to make it a little bit easier to grow things in, especially your root vegetables. They want loose soil in order for those little tendrils and whatever fruit or tuber is developing to be able to penetrate the soil and grow without being constricted. And so for the last year and a half, we have been adding every every bit of compost that our farm makes. So if you're like us and you want to get into regenerative farming and the no-till method, it might take you a couple of years, and I don't think it's necessary to have this guilt trip over tilling up your soil once or twice. Honestly, red clay is a great soil to grow in. Like I was just talking about, it's full of iron, it holds a lot of water, and it also holds a ton of nutrients. There are a lot of friends that I have that grow in sandy or loamy types of soil, and oh my goodness, the nutrients just leach right through it and drain right through it. So thank goodness for red clay. You guys can hate it, but I love my red clay and I'm gonna keep it. A couple years ago, I worked at a plant nursery where I did landscape design and helped customers pick out the perfect plants for their yard. And we got a lot of questions about landscape fabric. And my advice every single time was do not use landscape fabric, which begs the question, why are we rolling out hundreds and hundreds of feet of landscape fabric right here? In my landscapes, like with my hydrangeas and my hibiscus and our butterfly garden and our hummingbird garden, putting landscape fabric down is a little bit pointless because eventually you're gonna put mulch on top or pine straw, or you're gonna put something decorative on top of it to make it pretty. And those are natural organic materials that break down over time, creating this perfect area for seeds to germinate. I am not going to be mulching on this area right here, and I'm not going to let any kind of dirt or dust settle for very long and give seeds a perfect place to settle. So I love to use it in my vegetable area because it really does help to keep the weeds down. I don't need to be fertilizing my plants, as well as some like weedy plants that are wanting to grow up in there as well. One of the biggest issues that we deal with tomatoes is a fungal infection, which happens in really crowded, humid environments. And so by keeping my tomatoes free from any other foliage that's going to grow up around it and choke it, it's allowing a lot of airflow in through my tomatoes, so I don't have to deal with blight or anything else that may happen in a crowded condition. If you notice all these T-posts facing the wrong way, it's because we were actually installing a deer fence this year. Last year we did feed the deer quite a bit. We had plenty of tomatoes and we had plenty of pumpkins, but our green beans, our sweet potatoes, our squash, oh my goodness, everything in between was eaten by deer. And there's only so much you can do to spray and try to keep the deer away. So this year we are attacking it with a fence, and fingers crossed that they don't figure out how to jump over it, because they certainly could if they wanted to. Here we are, a little bit more into the process. Up here's the pumpkin patch. Right down here's where we'll have everything else. Well, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching us get this garden space ready. I hope you're encouraged and inspired a little bit to get your garden started. It's funny when we think about inspiration, living on 10.5 acres was never in the cards for us. We lived in concrete jungles for 10 years overseas, teaching English as a second language in some of the biggest cities of the world, and I just never knew that this would be part of our story. And my biggest inspiration was Laura from Garden Answer. When we were living in Taipei, Taiwan, I got really, really sick, and I was bedridden for 7 months. I was really, really sick, and even though I had no access to a garden so that I could implement what I saw Laura doing, I binge watched her show like my life depended on it, and now I get to implement a lot of what I learned. And so and you know, even though I had all that time to binge watch Laura's show on Garden Answer, and then later worked for Jenny and Jerry at Creekside Nursery, where I just had access to tons of education, I am still learning so much. And the best way of learning really is just to get your hands in the dirt. And so I hope that you're encouraged to get your hands in the dirt and to try to grow something. It keeps you humble because you're always going to be learning something and realizing that you have a long way to go. But it is one of the best things for the soul. Now that I'm a little bit more mobile and I'm getting a little bit healthier, I'm able to be a little bit more active, still not as active as I wish I could be. But on those really hard days, it is nice to get out in the garden, because at least I can be enjoying nature and feeling the goodness of the Lord by eating a fresh tomato every once in a while. So that's all for today's video. We'll see you next time. Bye.